Hi, I'm Dr. Johnny Lamb. I'm a senior lecturer in music, but also a songwriter, producer, and musician. I perform primarily as 30 Pounds of Bone. I've played in lots of other bands, lots of tours, lots of things, lots of records, and that's what I like to do. I think there's sort of three. I might change this as I go, but I think there's sort of three things that are sort of important. Firstly is a sort of rejection of sort of anarchic sort of violence, and that sounds in particular if you think about sort of Fugazi and people like that, the kind of the ending or the shutting down of slam dancing and shouting and what's that sort of uniform behaviour or kind of expressions of violence, those kind of things. That's and also kind of as that relates to kind of alcohol and drug abuse in particular. That's one significant thing. The other thing that I think is interesting is in straight edge, it sort of veers across to sort of both sort of radical politics, particularly sort of leftist stuff, veganism, vegetarianism, those kind of things. But it also, because it's abstinent as a principle, it allows in conservative politics. So you get kind of two tiers, one conservative and one radical, and those sort of coexist, perhaps not that easily. And I think within that you get a sense with straight edge where it sort of intellectualizes, particularly sort of US hardcore, and that's sort of coming from the Washington DC scene. And what follows that is a sort of a more thoughtful thing and a more sort of organized way of resistance, in particular to the machinations of the music industry, which forms a kind of a really significant blueprint for the kind of DIY music that follows it. So I think those are the kind of three sort of key things I would think as sort of interesting kind of impacts and sort of hangovers of kind of the beginnings of straight edge. I mean, one of the things, and inevitably, I think in this conversation we're going to keep coming back to Ian MacKaye as a kind of individual, and I think the kind of sort of there's a part of straight edge which sort of remains sort of relatively unproblematic hardcore, but the kind of the lyricism changes. The lyricism becomes about those preoccupations with abstinence, with sobriety, with veganism, vegetarianism, leftist politics, all of those kind of things. Sometimes Christianity, which is interesting. But where, if you sort of go to the sort of origin of the phrase and of the source and kind of that kind of stuff, particularly into Fugazi, what you end up with is a shift musically in what happens in punk. So you have reggae and dub, which have been a sort of, I mean, certainly kind of big influence on UK punk through the Clash and stuff like that, but a kind of a using of those things. So if you think sort of Guns of Brixton over here, you might look at Fugazi as kind of okay, that's happening, but there's also, you get that sort of post-hardcore principle where you've got sort of punk and hardcore things, you've got reggae and dub, and then you've got sort of more sort of post-rock principles and, you know, certainly sort of elements of jazz happening. So and again, particularly in Fugazi, that fusion of musics that was sort of I think sort of quite transformative. And I think, you know, the first time I heard a Fugazi record, it was unlike any other hardcore record. And the other thing, and I don't know if this is straight edge specific or just something that comes from that core of bands, is increasingly a really inflated sense of musical discipline. The bands become super tight. They become super brilliant. They become just incredible technical players, particularly in terms of timekeeping and challenging time signatures, where kind of previously punk had been basically, it's all 4/4 or 6/8, almost all 4/4. You start to get lots of different things. You get polymeter, you get polyrhythm, you get these amazing absences and silences and kind of moments like that. And I think that's, whether that's straight edge as a principle, perhaps not. I think in terms of content, you can talk about straight edge, but in terms of real musical shift, you're looking at Ian MacKaye as a kind of, and the rest of Fugazi as well, as sort of pioneers in shifting the sort of shape and the kind of sphere of influence that kind of comes into hardcore and post-hardcore, which I think is super interesting. I think it can come across as preachy. I think it can come across as judgmental. I think in particular, the sort of militance of some of those straight edge shows, Fugazi included, there can be a sense where people are quite behaviours and kind of enjoyable things and dancing that would be kind of totally acceptable within kind of other hardcore units, or pretty much all gig culture, become non-permissible, and there's a danger that it becomes sort of authoritarian, and I think that can be tricky, and I think also that sort of and this is either a negative or not, depending on where you stand. But from one perspective, the idea that a version of punk rock, or a version of hardcore that sort of provides a foundation for sort of more conservative values can start to be sort of problematic, particularly in terms of sort of abstinence and certain views on, let's say, kind of civil rights, or on sort of body freedom, or on women's rights. All of those kind of things can get co-opted quite simply under the banner of straight edge, which is absolutely not in the sort of spirit of the origins of it, and I think that's probably quite problematic. There are loads. I'll try not to go on too long. I think I'll try and distill it down to a couple. I think one of the things that I think is really, really interesting is that it allowed for underage people to go to gigs, so hence the cross, which is great. It allows for a reduction in sort of drunkenness and violence at shows, so people are safer, and people who don't want to get kind of pushed around in a mosh pit or kind of hit by slam dancers are able to kind of watch. There's an amazing video, Shut the Door, of Fugazi, sort of live show, and it's sort of, okay, it's a hardcore show, and it's violent and it's loud and it's all of those kind of things, but the audience are like sitting on the floor.
Barely see my breath, surrounded by jealousy and death. I can't be reached, only heaven call, dragged underneath, separate from you all.